Mashta's and Martin Despang's show, Urban Transcendence. One of the last shows, we started this little POE, post-occupancy evaluation series, so we continue this today. And for that, last time we drove up to the Krogman headquarters, nicknamed the Wood TV, and we drove up north towards the South Sea, approximately 2 hours away. This time we drove exactly the opposite way. We drove south. This is direction the Alps. But we also only drove 2 hours. Last time we drove on a beautiful highway. This time we took the famous Autobahn, which in fact me with my little Twingo as my sustainable, because keeping it in the life cycle product, I don't think it's as much fun as people think it is. But anyways, I made it. That's all that matters. So we're here for various reasons. This is also the beginning of a little series within the series of POE. Last time we had the building typology of office, meaning the human event and activity of work. This time we are introducing another typology that has a lot to do with the idea of the show Urban Transcendence. Co-founder Alia Mashta got initially excited about the show because she wanted to introduce emerging ideas, emerging tendencies to the islands of Hawaii. So this today is the typology of playing, we would say. In 3 shows, we're going to introduce you to 3 different kindergartens. And so kindergartens in school was my initial access to Think to Hawaii when I read in the newspaper that the Department of Education was questioned about how to keep or increase the human comfort in schools. And the provocative title in the Star Advertiser was Air Conditioning Schools. When I contacted Howard Wigg, which got me in front of a camera with him a couple of months ago, and we talked about that subject matter live in front of a camera. So we're going to introduce you guys to 3 different projects in 3 different locations with 3 different approaches. And what they share is a belief in that the truth for a livable future lies within the future generations. We had introduced to you a couple of emerging architects already, and so this time we will introduce you to the even younger generations of the keiki, so the little children who will be in charge of our future. So some of us, including Ali, Jay, and me, believe that the future lies within that generation. So we're here for another reason that has an analogy or a similarity to our island of Oahu. That is that we're here on a university campus. So as we all know, we got QH, my employer, on Oahu and the other islands. Here we have the University of Göttingen. And this is one of the most traditional universities in Germany. It has been founded many centuries ago and is leading in many fields of predominantly the arts and the science, more science than art actually. So I'm sitting here on the campus. You can see in the back of me university architecture, institutional typologies. You also see me wearing the little winter clothes I had taken with me, sort of prepared for my home country culture climate. So today it needs a shirt, a sweater, and a coat, because the temperatures here in moderate climate zones, you never know. Today it's mid-June, it's only in the, I would guess, upper 50s the best. So it could be rather cold, could be rather warm. We already talked that in a climate like that, which actually is dominating the world because 60% of the climates are equal to this climate, the temperate climates, whereas the other 40% are our climate on the islands of Hawaii, the tropical climates. As we had started to talk about, this leads to a significantly different approach, how to build buildings. Here being wall architecture, to wall yourself in, to cover yourself, wrap your surface to stay warm in the wintertime, whereas our point was that why we should go back more to how it used to be to build roof architecture, because all you need is protection from the intensity of the sun and the rain. You can also hear some background noise. There's some gardening, some landscaping, maintenance going on here, because you can see besides of the buildings in the back, which are obviously dated back to the 1970s, where there was a heavy belief in concrete as an innovative material. Other than that, a significant part of the campus is basically kept as landscape. It's actually a demonstrative landscape that has a lot of native species, but also introduces a lot of exotic, foreign, so to speak, invasive species for demonstrative purposes. Also, I hope the sound is okay because we got some significant wind, and also I'm also every once in a while glimpsing up, checking the weather because there's some rain in the forecast. So I hope we don't get interrupted because of that. Not because of me. There's nothing that can get damaged, but I got our technology down here on a laptop. So keep the fingers crossed. You see in the background is recent additions to the campus architecture of the University of Göttingen. Very progressive work by architects from Stuttgart. This is called the X Lab. So it's a laboratory building where students basically learn by doing, so hands-on activities. It was built a couple of years ago, right before we got commissioned to design the building we're going to get to. When I'm talking we, it's also important for me whenever I show projects to you to make clear to you that they are a product of generations Ohana themselves. Our firm Despang Architecten is comprised of Günter Despang, my dad, and Cynthia Despang, my sister, and Isabel Schlittmann, and myself. So it's always a collaborative work. So we were commissioned here some years ago. The 3 kindergartens we're going to show you are going to demonstrate a sequence of levels of awareness and growing, and but the continued understanding of that good architecture is customized to specific needs. To keep in mind is the nature of the client. Krogman and his typology of workspace was customized personally to his needs and wishes. And you guys saw that, how much he identified himself with the architecture, because he was the client, he was the contractor, he's the user. The nature of how kindergartens are run here in Germany is that they're basically run by the government, the state, and then the positions for the directors of the schools and kindergartens are basically advertised. And due to the mechanics in place, hardly ever is the real person who runs the place hired by the time the building is designed. So that leads to a certain disconnect between the design of the building and the user participation and incorporation. So for the time being, there are people who represent the real user, represented by the institutions, sort of by the clients, here by the university. So whom we're going to meet later on is Ms. Lorai. Ms. Lorai is the director of the kindergarten. She's going to show you the building from the inside. Is going to talk about the building. I'm hoping that she's going to speak in English to you, because this kindergarten is actually for the children of the students of the university and also of the students of the teachers. And the university is obviously multilingual, so here the education in the kindergarten is also at least bilingual, so English has been spoken in this kindergarten as German is. So introducing the concept of the building here is that I've introduced you to the context, to the surrounding. You see a multitude of buildings, and they're going to move more and more. If you could look towards my right, there's another new building around us. The background noise now was a bus, so there's pretty intense public and private infrastructure. Also, there's some construction sound, which you hear every once in a while from this side. So it's a very dynamic environment that gets more and more densified and more urbanized. And since the topic of the show is urban transcendence, although it implies it only deals with the urban, as we have said at the very beginning, and from time to time we remind ourselves that actually the city, so the urban, always needs the hinterland, which is another word, a German word that made it to American language, so the countryside, so to speak. Because although that's debatable, and we hopefully get a couple of shows talking about that, we already have some guests in mind to talk about how self-sufficient a city could be. There is sort of a theory or a suspicion that the city cannot be self-sustained entirely, so it needs a country to supply. So there's a reciprocity, there's a collaboration, there's a coordination, there's negotiation between the two fabrics of the city and the country. And this became a very particular, actually the initial design determining factor for this building here, because taking all things in consideration, and one of them was to build, once again, like already Krogman headquarters was introduced to you, a zero-net building. Zero-net means for public clients that they want to go passive as much as possible. That's a keyword, Milan and the campus. So after looking at the campus being in this particular part where the side should be, we are, after a long phase of research, our deep feeling and belief was that we shouldn't build here. That, of course, is a crucial conflict, because the client wanted a kindergarten, and we felt this campus here, that green lung of the campus, that kind of green pathway, should be kept. At the same time, fauna became involved, and there's again, Hawaii, as we know, has the largest diversities of species in the world. So here in this area, it's a prairie dog that is sort of a native species that is endangered. And there are many of other sort of insects here, like bees and wasps and other insects that is their home here. And so we were respectful of that, and we're looking for a solution that could be a compromise that basically could allow human beings and nature to live in harmony with each other. So at Krogman, we were talking about the fifth facade, and we're introducing the roof to you as a facade. At Krogman, having the purpose to basically funnel the cold winter winds over the building. And here, again, I'm going to put my collar up because it's really getting pretty chilly here. And that's also a good chance to demonstrate that the direction behind me, the direction, this way is north as well. So we have the same condition that if I would sit here in December, this wouldn't be enough. I would have to wear even more layers and coats, talking wall architecture. So I'm already in the building, or I should say I'm on the building, because once again we're on the roof of the building. But this roof looks significantly different than Krogman's roof, because this roof is something that I also want to propose and encourage to do more of these in Hawaii. This is a green roof, most obviously, as you can see behind. I want to introduce to you the two different kind of green roofs. There are extensive green roofs and intensive green roofs. And a while ago I had a little challenge to distinguish the two, to separate the two. So I want to share my little hint with you, which is the intensive. So the word intensive means a lot. So that's what an intensive green roof is. We're going to introduce to you another kindergarten for the city of Hanover that has an extensive green roof, which is basically a very thin layer of green sedum that is just enough to let green things grow, but never big stuff. Whereas this campus here, this is about real green. This is about big green. This is about thinking big as far as the hybridism of architecture and landscape. So we opted for an intensive green roof. Intensive green roof means approximately a foot thick soil that you put on a root-resistant roof membrane, and in this case here, because of the climate, another foot of insulation, and then on a concrete roof. This is a very safe roof and a very effective green roof, because as you can see behind me, nature has done what we were hoping to take over and occupy this roof. In the very first scene you saw a fence. I'm now past or behind the fence. I hope when certain things that still have to be negotiated as far as code and user anticipation and participation, that the ultimate idea of this green roof could be activated, which is actually to have the children, the users of the building, use the green roof in a productive way. Again, a very, I think, timely and important topic on our islands of Hawaii, where not only the use of energy, talking zero net of this building, but also the cost of food is a significant challenge, and there are many initiatives that Think Tech Hawaii has been reporting on and continues to feature, that there are initiatives to grow locally. So the pedagogy of this part of the building is pretty instrumental, because it wants to reconnect the keiki, the children, to the cultivation of food. So if they do that around their building, here in fact sort of in their building / on their building, the idea is to really help the children's understanding of food, the value of food, and with that help with a more nutritious and more healthy behavior. So we have now been walking around the building and are on the south side of the building. So up front, if you want to sort of directly take something from these buildings and build them the way they are in Hawaii, which you shouldn't, because every climate is specific to its place and culture and climate, you're going to do things differently. So probably if you still want to do it, you're probably going to turn this building around here, that you have this side facing north, where you get the daylight efficiency, which is one of the main aspects of this facade, and you have the green roof towards the north in Hawaii. Here in temperate, chilly summer Germany, you turn it the other way, the way you see it in the back, where the glass that you see now, part of the shades down, because there was some sun not too long ago. But in the winter sun, all the shades are up, and the deep winter sun can penetrate deeply into the building and passively heat the building. So passive means there's no active technology involved, there's no PV, so photovoltaic or solar involved, so to indirect heat the building. The building is directly heated by the rays of the sun that pass through the glass, convert that into heat, and that heat gets stored in the thermal mass of the building, which is the very special strategy of this building here, which you will see when we get into the building. So you see also the adjacent neighboring building, the X-flat building here. And again, from here it's a building, from the north it's a non-building, and it's also a non-building to the west, which is where the building is also burned. So these are the both directions that you want to keep the sun out, and that actually applies to Hawaii as well. The west sun, as we all know, the hotels that are facing the ocean on Waikiki have a big problem because the sunset view is great, but the sunset sun or the pre-sunset sun is pretty brutal and overheats, so you have to bring the shades down. So here we burned that as well, so there's no solar overheating in the summer, whereas towards the east is direction right, where you're looking is where the two existing buildings are. So we took the synergy of the buildings already being there and have the entrance facade towards that direction, and as well the existing buildings then shading the entrance. What's pretty significant about this facade here, this elevation, are these concrete frames. These concrete frames, as many elements in our buildings, are multi-duty and multi-purposed. So these frames, as already indicated, are the scaffolding or basically the armature to hold the shading devices. There are multiple different devices of different kinds which you can operate individually and separately from each other. So there's a top one that you bring down when the sun, this is for the highest summer sun, which then shades the glass facade while you can still keep the views, whereas for the early spring or the late summer sun, you bring in an additional piece of shading down because the sun is then already pretty low. So there's a strategy. These frames are pulled higher than the facade and become a balustrade. This balustrade you maybe had seen a glimpse of when we were still on the roof, but probably not because the grass is already too high. But when you're on the road, you can see that. So we were talking multi-purposing. We thought this is a campus. You know, you got students from over the world. They want to hang out. They're going to get together. So at night, when the kindergarten is not occupied, they can actually be on the green roof and use the ledge of the balustrade part as a bar, hang out, have a couple of non-alcoholic drinks, hopefully chill out, and take their beverage, the empty bottles with them in the morning. Then kindergarten can be kindergarten again. And also the frames have 3 feet depth, and the 3 feet depth is important to, when the surface shade is down, create a stack effect to draw out the heat that has sort of developed behind the screen. Last, not about at all least, it would be nice if summer would be back. In a couple of days it will be. You can see the keiki lounging on these frames. At the bottom part, the horizontal sort of plinth part of the frame becomes a lounge chair or a lounge bench, because 3 feet is the approximate length of the children in the building. With that, I think we're going to stop here and we're going to move on now into the building. Now we're inside, finally. I started the tour outside on the roof first, which I call the fifth facade. And then I moved on to the southern side, and now I'm inside, which is the heart and the core of the building. So thanks for being our guest today. My name is Lorai,
and you're the director of the kindergarten here at the University of Göttingen. So thank you very much for having us. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind, if you could explain a little bit about the building, and the institution, and the pedagogy.
Okay, maybe it's possible to talk in German for me.
Well, my English is very good, but I will.
Thank you.
Of course.
But maybe it's a bit easier for me.
All right.
Ja, okay. Wir haben hier eine Einrichtung mit 3 Gruppen. Das ist eine Krippe, das ist die Altersgruppe 1 bis 3 und eine Kindergartengruppe im Alter 3 bis 6 Jahre. Wir sind bilingual, wir haben 3 englische Kräfte in der Einrichtung, die den ganzen Tag Englisch sprechen mit den Kindern. Die Kinder sind in Gruppen eingeteilt, 2 Gruppen für die Altersgruppe 1 bis 3 und eine Gruppe eben für die älteren Kinder. Es gibt einen festen Tagesablauf. Eingebunden ist das Ganze in eine Trägerschaft von Studenten der Göttingen. Studenten werden betreut in ganzen 5 Einrichtungen mit 250 Kindern. Und wir haben eben das Glück, hier am Nordcampus sein zu können in diesem besonderen Bauwerk.
Right. So you explained that the university has 6 facilities total, did you say? 5, yeah. 5 facilities total, with 250 children total.
Yeah.
And you are privileged to have the newest facility here on the North Campus. And the building has basically 3 groups. And it starts with the toddlers, the very little ones, age 1 to 3. And you also then have a group with 3 to 6 year young ones. So like you say,
Till they are going to school.
So it's kind of, I think it's kind of preschool and English system is different. And it's a bilingual education here. And the children are basically children from students and faculty, right? Both.
Both.
So there's a very international, intercultural community here. So the children are being raised in both English and German. And that's the pedagogical approach.
We have 14 nations altogether.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Yeah, talk a little bit, if you like, about sort of the like to call it, because we had a nice pre-discussion here, your kind of personal understanding of education and the facilitation of education and how the built environment could support that. That would be great.
Für uns ist es ganz wichtig, die Nachhaltigkeit des Lebens den Kindern zu vermitteln. Deswegen kommt uns diese ökonomische Bauweise sehr entgegen. Wir sparen Energie. Das ist also heute sehr wichtig, den Kindern zu vermitteln. Genauso was Mülltrennung angeht oder nachhaltigen Anbau von Lebensmitteln, wie gehen wir mit Lebensmitteln um. Durch unsere verschiedenen Nationalitäten hier im Haus ist es wichtig, dass wir verschiedene Lebensmittel und Lebensformen anbieten. Und das spielt immer zusammen.
That's great. So you say that from your understanding, the building should sort of demonstrate and facilitate the principles of sustainability so that the children grow up to be in balance with the elements. And this is why you think the way the building is conceptualized and constructed and made is an important pedagogical contribution to this raising that awareness of the children. It also goes into the vegetation, so the landscaping is very important. It's also productive landscaping and also waste management. That will please my co-host here is Anya Mashtabek in Honolulu, and that's one of her special fields of interest and expertise is that kind of waste management. So that the children really kind of grew up here to become responsible world citizens. So Yeah, maybe we talk a little bit about what's special about the building here. I mean, the audience has already seen it from the outside, but
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit about the inside, what's
Yeah.
sort of unusual in the building.
Ja, es funktioniert ohne Heizung. Das ist für uns ganz besonders gut. Wir haben diese großen Glasfronten, die man jetzt ja auch sehen kann. Das ist für die Kinder ganz toll, auch für die ganz jungen Kinder. Die können einen richtigen Blick raus haben in die Natur. Es ist alles sehr offen und transparent. Das ist auch der Weg, wie wir arbeiten. Unsere Arbeit ist transparent den Eltern gegenüber. Und eben das Haus bietet diese Transparenz durch viel Glas. Und die puristische Bauweise entspricht unserer Auffassung von Ästhetik.
It's excellent to hear. Almost too good to be translated, so I will do my best again. So you say that the building, the way it's made, so the way it's positioned, so it's basically going to be a zero-net building. However, I already explained to the audience that the public clients are always very heavy on passive system. Whenever it comes to active systems, they're a little bit more hesitant. So whenever we see lights on or the dishwasher is operating, this is energy that we still need to harvest. But the building itself, as primarily its heating cost is basically off the grid because it does it passively. So all these glass fronts, this is why we have positioned ourselves here to demonstrate to the audience that this is where actually the building gets heated from the sun, basically, but it's also the light that comes from the sun, and that's a very important element for the children to grow up. And transparency is important, so that the children basically have an overview and can orientate themselves efficiently and effectively. And so it's very nice to hear as an architect that you say sort of the Puritan way, and nicely call it the Puritan, the puristic way of building. So what we basically see here is that the walls are basically prefab concrete, that this is basically supporting your pedagogy of using essential means, just using the right elements in the right place, and more and more less, as to raise the children's awareness for again, becoming this kind of globally responsible consumers. That's great to hear.
We do a lot of documentation about our work with the children, and the view is better for the documentation because we put it on the wall for the parents. We have special folders, so everything is very colorful, and we like these pure view.
Okay. So that's great to hear. We already talked about a principle, I guess something that's yet to be optimized, because we actually got to know each other now, which is 4 years after the facility has been opened and operated, which is partly to my fault because I've been in the U.S. for so many years, first in Arizona and then in Hawaii now. But actually the way it should be, that we should have met at the beginning of the planning process so that you as the actual user actually have the impact already. And we walk through the building, and we also want to make sure that the audience understands that POE, the post-occupancy evaluation, is not just praising the good things, which I appreciate, but you're also very constructively critical about certain things and say, dear architect, if you would ever do it again, please consider this or that. So that's very important. We should probably also share with the audience that you said, as far as zero net, the winter is perfect, does a great job, but the summer overheating protection is an ongoing challenge.
It is.
I share that, I know that, and this is something that the international community of architects and scientists have to continue to work on. But it's great to see that you're like, although these are challenges, you're not giving up on the idea and the concept of, and you say, let's face it and let's tackle it together.
We like the idea, but we need to, the sun heating is really hard, because of these big window parts, and this is a thing which should change or had to change in the future.
I explained to the audience also that sort of specificity of place and culture and climate is very important. So if people hopefully get excited about the building, they shouldn't think that you should do it the same way in Hawaii. Whereas in fact in Hawaii, I always say we have roof architecture in Hawaii is the best because the temperature is so privileged, it's always the same. Whereas here is wall architecture. Wall architecture presents some challenges because we know we have summers here, so you got to take off. I always compare the wall to the coat, so you got to take off the coat in the summer. In the winter, you got to put it on, and often we have the spring and the fall where you better layer. So we can address that much easier with clothes, and so building as a more static organism has kind of a challenge to do that.
And we should think about the climatic change. It will be hotter in the summer, so we need this protection. Now we have the possibility to open the roof as well, so this works.
So we were talking about is that we also worked on the building. There were certain things that were optimized and added. We also put another partition wall at the back of the hallway. And you can talk about the hallway a little bit as an additional pedagogical space. Vielleicht mal dazu ansprechen.
Einen kurzen Break machen. Michael? Kannst du mit dem Stock mal zur Mama gehen? Weil du bist nämlich die ganze Zeit mit auf der Kamera und ich weiß nicht, ob die Mama das möchte. Ja? Danke! Okay, the way through our house, the corridor is a special part from this house because we use it like a separate play room because this is one problem of this house. We haven't enough rooms for special activities. So we need this corridor for special things. And we changed the current rooms a bit. So we built a wall to separate the corridor from the other parts, and that works really well.
That's great. So Laura said that the hallway is actually the only function in the program that is not prescribed. Actually, these which I would call living rooms, by the way, people in Hawaii, because that's where they live actually most of that time, and they're absolutely determined to 50 square meters. And I remember from the planning phase, it can't be 49, it can't be 51. Because it's about funding, and so it's a big challenge. So everything is prescribed, so that actually the architect has very little flexibility to even express herself himself. But the hallway is the only, because he can't really prescribe, because the hallway is sort of specific to the layout of the building. So you can't prescribe it to the millimeter. And so this is why we always say, we always fight for it to make it as wide as we can. And you nicely acknowledge that makes sense, because then it becomes a street. Where actually, besides, children play in the street. Reminds me of like Sesame Street as a classic, that's like you play on the street, that's where interaction basically happens. And if you make it too narrow, it can't happen, because then barely can people pass each other. But if you make it wide enough, the ones who use it for frequency and logistics interact with the ones who use it for communication. So that's a very
everybody here.
That's very good. So maybe to the audience a little bit, if people probably would be confronted with the thought of having concrete walls in a kindergarten, there's probably a lot of reservation in theory. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the reality. Also vielleicht, wo wir darüber gesprochen haben, dass Sie einfach sagen, dass Sie eigentlich die die Farblosigkeit und
Okay.
wiederum, so schön gesagt, der Purismus der Wände eigentlich für sie wertvoll ist
Ja.
und sie keine Angst vor haben, wie man gemein ist. Wenn man der Bevölkerung, also dem normalen Bürger sagen würde, also eine Betonwand in der Kita, das ist sogar auch total groß.
Nein, also wir finden, dass es wirklich gut ist mit diesen einfachen Elementen, weil die Kinder schon so farbig sind. They bring them a lot of color. Und ja, unsere Kunden sind sehr bildungsnah orientiert durch die Universität und sie können das Gute aus der Sache erkennen.
Okay.
Ja, also es entspricht unseren Klientel, unseren Kunden.
That's interessant to hear. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So you say that, actually talk about your occupants as your clients, which is an interesting idea because it's about serving
Yeah.
the university. So your clients are basically already due to their higher education background,
Yeah.
so they're more prepared for basically that approach of saying less is more, which comes from architect Mies van der Rohe, by the way, who was an advocate for that, and saying, you know, if you have, he went so far that he, by the way, said, you know, an empty space is almost like religion, where you start to think about your existence, whereas a cluttered space takes you away, distracts you from the essential things of life.
Unsere Kunden, unsere Kinder können den Raum selbst füllen. Es ist nicht so vorgegeben.
Okay, yeah. So it's exactly that if it's neutral, the children that bring in the colors themselves, not only what they wear, as I understand, but also what they create. So their creations, which are mostly color, by nature, I think the gray wall is a better contrast. It actually supports, and lets almost like pop out the creation more, as opposed to when the architect already tries to be the creator, then the architect sort of competes with the child. So that's great to hear.
We do a lot of artwork. We have discussions with the children, about some arts from Van Gogh, maybe, or clay.
Oh, great.
So
Wow.
with a lot of, we go on excursions. Ja, viele Ausstellungen, Museen. Und die Kinder haben eine Idee von Kunst und können unterscheiden, differenzieren. Miro ist immer auch ein guter Künstler für Kinder und in Kombination mit unserem Haus ist das eine schöne Verbindung. Wir haben oft Bilderausstellungen und das wirkt sehr gut.
Okay. That's great to hear. This is really great for me too, because I was never able to think it to that extent, because that's you who brings the life into the building, and also my idea was to create a framework, so the infrastructure seems to have worked, which is great. So you say that you start very early with art education, and you confront the children with the artists and the masters of art, Van Gogh and Miro, who is a great role model that children can connect to very well. And I find this really interesting because not only do you teach them about, you teach them about science and art. So the building is about science and arts, because I always, when we had the first open house here, right around when it was open, we had many people here and they were looking at the walls. And some people had reservations saying, well, why should my child be in a bunker? And I basically said, well, for two reasons. I said, for the first reason, this is the science reason, please close your eye. And basically, I wanted them to touch the wall with closed eyes. And it was summer, and at that time it was still cold, and I said, it helps you, the wall helps you physically for your well-being. And I said, and then I took a piece of something and showed the contrast on the wall. So it's excellent to hear that works. So it's a real comprehensive education about the science of the arts. And I think, I started the show today and saying that's where the children are called keiki, by the way, in Hawaii, a wonderful world.
Yeah.
So that's where the future lies in the emerging generation. And many, I think, research shows that cultures or countries that we look up to, for example, to my understanding, the northern countries, that's part of their secret, so to speak, why they're so successful as cultures in many ways, because they upfront that into the education and stimulate.
Daycare is really a big part of children's life, because they are here sometimes over 9 hours per day. So this is important for them to have a few around special things.
That's great. Well, I'm glad we transitioned into English because yours is excellent, so I don't even need to translate it.
It's on the camera, so I'm not free.
That's great. Well, I would say thanks for your time and sharing everything, and let's stay in touch and continue this and both learn from it.
And what I would like to say is, what's important for good pedagogical work is to have time, educators, and space. That's the most important thing for us.
That's excellent to share with us as architects and as cultures, and again, I think this will be very beneficial for our fellows in Hawaii. You brought up an interesting part that you say you have a large Asian clientele, so to speak. Here, that's also an interesting analogy, and we found that actually Asian cultures also are there's obviously there's not only Buddhism, but there's minimalism, and architecture actually traces back to Asian cultures. Architect Fadawando was one of the masters actually of pure Puritan concrete architecture. So maybe that also helps that sort of this kind of intercultural and the Asian influence. We talked about the sleeping rooms. Maybe if you want to maybe address that in a few words.
We have 15 little small beds in one room, and it looks like it's a German fairy tale like Schneewittchen. But the room is a bit too small for these beds, and it's better to have no bed, only the mattress on the floor, so you can use the room for anything else, not only for sleeping.
That's another great consideration that she says the sleeping rooms, which were again very rigorously prescribed square footage wise, and she says they're actually too small for that. Specifically when you put in the bed, which is bulky and eats up the space, and then it's basically occupied by the physicality of the bed the whole time, so you should just basically take out the bed, bring in the mattress, which again, Asian culture is very used to, the tatami mat, roll it out when you sleep, roll it back together and store it, and you have an extra room.
And the children love to cuddle each other and to be very together. It's good for them. And we have a lot of brothers and sisters in our house. They're also special. All the ones are in a green group. It's called green group. We have 3 names: yellow, blue, and green group. Blue and yellow are the Greece groups. From that they mix, and then there will be the green ones. So, and when they can see each other, this is like family. This is really good. And the 3 colors are complementary to these colors. In the basic. We'll talk about these concepts.
Again, we will I think it's great to communicate that to other colleagues, both on the client side, both on the architect side, on the pedagogue side. So with all this experience together, I think many more of these facilities could thrive and could have a very important key impact on us as society. Because again, in the case here, it's for the future. So, thank you very much for your time and for creating this.